we are very delighted to have to be able to do this. It's of course a very difficult time, and we'll hear a little bit about that a bit later on. And of course, we hope that at some point we'll be able to go back to face-to-face meetings. But at the moment, we've been running our virtual meetings through Rare Dementia Support for the last few months during the COVID outbreak. And it's great that so many people can join. We have about 100 people booked on today, which is amazing, and people joining from all over the country. So it's great that so many people can get involved. Little bits of housekeeping. We are recording everything. So if there are any bits that you unfortunately miss because of technical difficulties, everything will be recorded. It'll all be uploaded later today on the YouTube channel, and you will be able to see it all then. Unfortunately, we can't deal specifically with anyone's little individual web problems. None of us here are technical experts, but hopefully we can all, hopefully you'll all be able to hear everything and hear all of the talks. So going through the plan for today, you'll hear from Jill Walton, who I know many of you who've been involved in the group for a number of years will know. And Jill will talk a little bit about this difficult period and dealing with things during the coronavirus outbreak. And I know lots of you have had specific questions, which hopefully Jill will answer in her talk, but also we can talk a little bit about in the Q&A panel later on. And then one of the things that we've been talking about for a while, and many of you who've been with us for some time will recognize that the FTD support group has evolved a lot over time, and particularly recently as we've become part of the Rare Dementia Support family. And I think, as well as at the moment we have the larger face-to-face group meetings and our annual seminar, which is often our biggest meeting of the year, but actually we've listened to what people really want from larger meetings. This outbreak has allowed us to think about what we might do in some of those small groups. So Nikki's going to talk about what groups we've been doing and how we might take that forward. And we're always very keen to hear people's ideas about what kind of things people would like. One of the things that I think since Nikki's been running the group, this is, I think, has been very successful, and I think some of you are part of, is our buddying system. And I think, Nikki, are you going to talk a bit about that later on as well? Great. So, and for those of you that don't know about that's I think something that many people have found very helpful. So a little bit from us. I'll talk a bit later about things when we talk about the questions that people have sent in. But just for those of you that are thinking about services, as you realise, you know, lots of clinics at the moment are telephone clinics, and certainly here at the National Hospital, we've been doing telephone clinics with people. We recognise that that's not ideal, and it's certainly not ideal in terms of ongoing management. We hope we're going to be able to restart face-to-face clinics fairly soon, and I think you know, we're talking about this every day, and hopefully we'll be able to move back to that soon. The same is the case for our FTD research. You know, lots of trials and studies have been stopped for a few months, but we're just talking about how we get going with that and how we do it in the safest way possible with social distancing, and how we can get people back into our research studies. I think we've been very lucky. Lots of you have been involved in our research over time, and we have lots of research data that our team have been able to look at from home over time. So it's not that we've not been able to carry on with research, we've just not been able to do a lot of face-to-face research, but that's all of that is carrying on. So I'm delighted. I can see our numbers slowly creeping up as people start to call in. And I think just before Jill's talk, what what we will play you, as many of you know, we've been very, we get a lot of support, and particularly fundraising through the National Brain Appeal, which is the charity at the National Hospital, and have done a lot to support rare dementia support, of which FTD Support Group is part of. And so I think just before we go into the talks, Emily will play us a little video about fundraising from the National Brain Appeal.
Hello, my name is Eva Tate, and I'm the Major Appeals Manager and Manager of the Rare Dementia Support Fund held by the charity the National Brain Appeal. The National Brain Appeal raises money as the dedicated charity for the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and UCL Queen's Square Institute of Neurology. The National Brain Appeal raises funds for Rare Dementia supports 2,000 members to help individuals living with rare and early onset forms of dementia, their families, friends, and healthcare professionals. And we also hold several other funds for FTD and dementia research. The funding helps not only the support group meetings in London, but also the regional support groups, admin and support staff, and all other associated expenses, including the new online support groups. When things return to normal, there are travel and accommodation bursaries available to help members attend the meetings. This year, we've raised our fundraising target to 300,000, and this will rise further to 350,000 by 2022 to develop and extend the service in the areas of education, support, and research, with the ultimate aim that everyone affected by a form of rare dementia will have access to specialist information and support, as well as contact with other people with a similar condition. We apply for grants from grant-making trusts, foundations, and livery companies, and have a wonderful group of supporters, some of whom are here today, who fundraise for us in an amazing variety of ways. We would love it if you would like to sign up to our RDS fundraising newsletter to hear more of these stories and receive news of how we can support this community. We have had people do head shaves for us. We have had a gentleman drive across the Mongolian steppe in a VW Polo, and we have lots of people who take part in runs and virtual runs as well. At the end of February, we held a gala dinner called Mission Possible, where we raised 110,000 for the expansion of rare dementia support. And we are delighted to announce that in line with this expansion, the charity is committed to raise up to 7 million to create the world's first centre of excellence for rare dementias. If anyone would like to discuss any fundraising ideas or the new capital appeal, please do feel free to email me or my colleague Alexis, our Senior Fundraising Manager, who will speak about the innovative new ways you can be involved in fundraising for RDS, even during this challenging time. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alexis Gebby, and I'm the Senior Fundraising Officer at the National Brain Appeal. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to all of you who already fundraise for RDS. We really appreciate all of your incredible efforts, especially at this difficult time. My role at the National Brain Appeal is to look after all the amazing people taking on various fundraising activities for us. We have had people challenging themselves to run marathons, cycle long distances, climb mountains, and even take on skydives, all whilst raising money for RDS. We also have wonderful fundraisers out in the community who organise golf days, hold coffee mornings, host choir and carol concerts, and even shave their heads. These people ensure that more people like you can be supported through rare dementia support. If you're interested in becoming one of our fundraising heroes, then please do contact me. I am here to support you with your fundraising, and I'm more than happy to chat about any ideas that you may have. While at the moment it isn't possible to take part in a sporting challenge or hold a big fundraising gathering in your local community, we do have some fundraising ideas, such as taking on a solo virtual run or walk, hosting a quiz for your friends or family online, asking for birthday donations in lieu of going out, or even donating money that you may be saving by not travelling to work or buying your daily coffee. Do get in touch with me if you would like to get involved. In the meantime, take care and we hope to see you soon.
Right. I hope everyone, I didn't see that, but hopefully everybody's seen it. I've seen it before. It's a great video. So I think, you know, the work of the MBA is amazing. And, you know, I think that they're very supportive of us. So actually right on time, we can go over to Jill and hopefully, Jill, you're ready to get going. Amazing.
Yes, I am, and thank you, Emily, for the slides, which I know you've got prepared, and I think are going to come up on the screen just one by one as we go through this short presentation. So I'm indebted to Emily for her behind the scenes work. Thank you. Just a very brief introduction. Obviously, thank you, John, and thank you, Nikki, for inviting me to come and join you today. I'm afraid that I can't see you, and I would very much love to, because I'm sure there'll be some familiar faces amongst you who I'd love to say hello to and have a wave, and also some new faces who I'd love to get to know. So one day maybe, but for now, hello and thank you. This short presentation is based on a document that I wrote with Nikki, actually, right at the start of lockdown, when we were trying to find some sort of positives to put out on the RDS website as we kind of embraced lockdown. I have had one or two additional thoughts which I've added in since that time, because whoever would have thought that we were going to be embracing, what is it, 3 months as we speak of lockdown, and obviously more lies ahead. So for everyone living under the circumstances of the past 3 months, there have, of course, been some very real challenges and changes to our daily living patterns. We've all had to address those. But I think it goes without saying that for somebody living with a dementia diagnosis, or more specifically an FTD diagnosis, and for the people living with, caring for, or caring about somebody with this diagnosis, there have been obvious and additional pressures and challenges. And so I wanted to start this morning by saying thank you, a really, really heartfelt thank you to all of you for embracing those challenges. However well you feel you've managed or not, no one could have done it any better. So thank you. If we just move on to the next slide, I want us to take a moment to consider some of those additional challenges that you have faced over the past 3 months, with a specific acknowledgement of the impact that a diagnosis of frontotemporal dementia will have had upon these. I also ought to say at this point, just as an aside, I am aware that for some people, there have been positives that have come out of our lockdown experience. So a slowing down to our speed of life, a reduced number of kind of people coming in and out of our homes are two examples which I've heard, and I'm sure Nikki probably too will have more to add, but just there have been positives, I acknowledge. But for the purposes of this morning's interaction, we're looking at some of the additional stressors that I think all of us will accept have been part and parcel of this 3 months for most of us. So let's take a little look at some of the obvious challenges that have kind of come in centre left from lockdown and onwards. Many people have lived with an additional and very real level of fear throughout these last 3 months, be that fear of contracting COVID-19 for yourself, for your family, your friends, fear of having to go into hospital, the reality of a fear about our lifespan, the fear of actually, you know, facing death within a very short time frame. If we did contract COVID-19, we will have had a growing awareness of healthcare protocols, which perhaps put people living with dementia at a disadvantage. We will have had limited access to GP, community and hospital care services, limited or no access to home care services, There have been no day centre services, and no therapeutic activities have been available for people in the way that we previously sought. So a lot of those things that you used to do for your own pleasure or your own kind of getaway, those possibilities and options were taken away as well. For all of us, there's been difficulty understanding, remembering and applying government guidelines and rules, but even more so if we're trying to do that with a diagnosis of frontotemporal dementia and all the implications of that diagnosis. We'll have had concerns for the legal implications of breaking rules, and as the goalposts have changed, often quite rapidly, there's quite likely been tension and distress within families as to how to interpret those changes within your family and friend community. And that's clearly going to be the case for quite some time to come. Our social interaction has been massively reduced, with very minimal visits, if any, from friends and relatives. And so on top of that, we've probably had feelings of being isolated or abandoned, which again, with an FTD diagnosis, is perhaps more complicated and more impactful than for people who are considering the impact of these social engagements without that diagnosis. Many of us will have experienced financial challenges as a result of the last 3 months. And then all the online platforms, which have been remarkable in terms of the way they've galvanized services and tried to reach out so that services continued during this time. But we talk now about online fatigue. You know, some people kind of say, I can't face another Zoom meeting, and we kind of understand that. People have had issues in terms of poor connectivity during their online conversations, and so on and so on. The list isn't exhaustive by any means, but I just want you to hold on to this collection of issues, additional stressors, I think, which have been carried by you during this last 3 months, as we move on briefly to the next slide. And this slide, really, if you just have a read through of this slide, okay. So if we consider the causes of stress as listed on this slide, then I think you'll agree that all the factors we talked about on the last slide and listed are obvious and very real contributors to a loss of control, a loss of predictability, a loss of outlets for frustration, and the challenge of dealing with uncertainty about the future whilst being exhausted today. They're all present in our lives right now, and all the more so by virtue of the carer roles that you find yourselves in, or the diagnoses you're finding yourselves living with. It's reasonable to assume that you are living with additional levels of stress at the moment. And so let's just take a step back for a second and think, you know, how do we behave when we're stressed? How do we feel? What do we say? In what ways is our behaviour different when we're stressed? And perhaps think also about the people we care for or care about. Their behaviour too will most likely have been influenced by many of the same stresses, whether they fully understand them or have insight to recognise them fully. We're all different, but depending on our circumstances and abilities, we will all be responding in our own way to the stresses and challenges of life right now. So please give yourselves permission to acknowledge those additional stresses that we've been living with these past few months, on top of those that we were previously juggling before. Let's have a little think now about some of the things that might help. And I think Emily has the next slide ready. In view of the time that we've got together this morning, we're going to rattle through some of the commonly recognised strategies that we can adopt to help ourselves in challenging times. We won't do justice to any of them fully, but what I hope is that you can take what's helpful and leave what isn't, and perhaps take away and dig a bit deeper into any of the suggestions that might just ring true as worth having a try or being reminded about. So one of the obvious ones, of course, is when we feel a little bit out of control and as if life around us is out of our control, then we need to remind ourselves to take control of what we can control. So that might feel like very little at the moment, but whether it's taking time in the garden, arranging a vase of flowers, baking a cake, making a meal, whatever it is, whatever you can take control over, take it, own it, do it. Be careful of what we watch, and especially once we get into the evenings, just to be mindful of watching uplifting programmes rather than kind of doom-filled episodes that leave us perhaps psychologically not in the best place to go to bed. We're all aware, aren't we, that you are juggling a very finely balanced act, and it doesn't take much to tip the scales. Be aware of trigger points. They'll be different for all of us, but be prepared to acknowledge and identify them and to respond accordingly. Reach out for support. If you can identify people in your network who are able to help in a practical or emotional way, reach out to them. Stay connected. Isolation from our social networks can be harmful, and it's not always going to be like this. What ways are possible for you to stay connected, even if it's just on the periphery at this time? And perhaps be prepared to just go one step at a time. Our society is always pushing us to look to the future, isn't it? To know where we're heading and what we're aiming for. And whilst we do need to look down the future, down the road in terms of some of our future care planning, right now more than ever, we also need to relearn the art of dealing in the moment, a step at a time. It goes without saying that doing exercise is helpful, sort of mentally, psychologically, as well as physically. And also just speaking out or writing down our fears and anxieties and stresses. They lose some of the control they have over us when we actually write them down or speak them out. We can approach simple breathing exercises if we're feeling overwhelmed. And there are, of course, many variations on these. Being mindful, even in these days of limited access to resources, we can make a conscious effort to maximise the experiences that are available to us. So whether that's just feeling the soap suds as we shower in the morning, or feeling the softness of the dish, the washing liquid in the washing up bowl, whether it's feeling the textures of the food that we're preparing, to try and just be more mindful into the situations that we are facing. And I think sometimes when we're fearful of the worst, it can be really helpful just to consider what is the very worst thing that could happen here, and then to counter it with what would be the very best outcome, and then to try and position ourselves somewhere between the two, which is our more likely reality. There are simple distraction strategies that we can approach, and just very quickly to kind of run through one here. When things feel too much, this is a distraction strategy that really works. Look around you and try and identify 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And for the minute or so that it takes you to work through that exercise, I guarantee you won't be thinking about anything else. I've got 2 final slides, I think, and I just wanted to end with a couple of final comments. And Emily has this slide here. That's amazing. Thank you. Remember, you are in control of your thoughts. Don't allow them to bully you. Over the years, I think it's true to say we all develop unhelpful thinking habits, such as the 2 that I've listed on the slide here. And when we're vulnerable and in times of stress, these can take an unhelpful precedence in our thinking. So it can be helpful to identify our unhelpful thinking strategies. So 2 of the most common are being self-critical, okay, overly critical of ourselves, putting ourselves down, blaming ourselves for things which are not totally our fault, not helpful. And the other burdensome approach to our thinking is this idea of what I should and must do. Thinking or saying I should, I must, puts pressure on ourselves and sets up unrealistic expectations. Are you putting more pressure on yourself than you need to at this time? Setting unrealistic expectations. What might be more realistic? To perhaps say, I could do, or I choose to, or I will not. But shoulds and musts are rarely helpful. And I think if we look inside our own thinking strategies, there'll be others that we perhaps recognise as areas we could work on and perhaps change for our own well-being. This next slide is a heart-shaped slide, and it just comes really with me asking you to pause for a moment and focus on how you are and how you are doing. How are you managing? Please, please, please give yourselves permission to be kind to yourselves. Recognise that human beings have limits. You're not a robot. No one can go without enough sleep and not see consequences. No one can endure ongoing anxiety and not see consequences. No one is perfect. You are responding either as carers or people living with FTD through this lockdown period. You are responding imperfectly to an imperfect situation. Are you being kind enough to yourselves? I'm sending you a virtual hug, and I'm asking you to give yourselves one too. My final slide just reminds us that we're not alone. We're not alone. You've got people alongside you virtually, if not in real life, and the services of rare dementia support, of course, as you know, are accessible regardless of our lockdown experience. So I wanted to end where I began, really, by saying thank you again. Thank you to all of you for the immense efforts that you have made to survive this lockdown period for yourself and for those you care for. Thank you for the impact that that's had on the bigger picture for our nation. Acknowledge the effort that that has taken, and thank you for joining us this morning for this session.
Unmuted, good. Slow unmuting, but a virtual round of applause for Jill. You know, I've heard this in my phone calls to many people. It's a difficult time, and an added difficult time during COVID, and particularly when people don't necessarily understand social distancing and understand what to do. So it's nice to hear how we might deal with that, because undoubtedly it's been a difficult time for everyone. So we will move on, and Nikki is now going to talk to us a little bit about various rare disease support developments and initiatives, but particularly about how we might start to think about taking forward some of the smaller groups. And as I said before, I'm sure Nikki will say this as well, we're very keen to think about what kind of support we can provide on a smaller basis and on a small group basis that people would be interested in. Nikki.
Thank you, John, and thank you very much to Jill as well. Jill just has this amazing calming voice that just makes all of us feel so much at ease and so relaxed, and so much so that I forget what I actually have got to say to you, because now I'm in this complete different zone of, oh, everything's nice and calm and relaxed. So thank you, Jill, for that. And hello to everybody. It's so wonderful to be able to present to you today in our new virtual support group. Thank you to all 100+ of you that have joined today and showed interest in it. Isn't technology amazing that can actually bring us together like this? I echo Jill's words of I actually miss seeing everybody, you know, in the physical presence at the Welcome Centre, the lovely sort of venue that we have for our support groups. But I'm really pleased that we can still be able to support you, and that we're actually much more accessible to all the people that can't actually attend our physical meetings. We know we have people from all over the world that sort of will be listening today. So hello to you all and welcome. And for any of you who I haven't met before or haven't been in contact with, I'm the direct support team lead, and I work alongside Claire and Livy, who are here in the background today, working with Emily on all the IT side, making sure everything is running smoothly for us. The direct support team started last year, and we've built sort of, as we've come along, we've evolved, and we've sort of taken our new ideas, taken all of our experience with support in the community to see how we can develop things for RDS. And I'm delighted to also tell you that we will be having a new team member starting in the next few months. Hannah will be joining us, and she's an Admiral nurse, and she's going to be joining the team, and she'll be focusing on complex needs at the later stages. So it'll be a really valuable addition to our team, which I'm really pleased about. Now, the direct support team is here to provide support for all our members, and there's about 1,800 or more at the moment. And it's, like I said, it's not a national membership, it's a global membership. We are supporting people all over the world with emails, sometimes telephone calls, and we also have on our membership a huge amount of health professionals, and this is increasing all the time, which I'm pleased about. So, you know, these health professionals are joining our membership, so we can provide advice and resources to them to help support you in the community, which is a really positive thing. Our support is really variable according to need, and really a lot of the time we are starting off with navigating new members to the right professionals to get a proper formal diagnosis and be properly assessed and have the specific details in place. We are more than aware that this is a very long, drawn out process, a real headache for people, and initially there is often a lot of misdiagnosis out there. So, you know, we are really, really sort of appreciate your patience while this time is going on, but it's really important that this is put right in the first place. And when people get their diagnosis, we can provide them with post-diagnostic support as soon as possible, so to help them understand their diagnosis, put some strategies into place to support the families. We are very well aware that a diagnosis of FTD can have a huge impact on families, and we really want you to sort of reach out to us if you've just been newly diagnosed to be able to get some support. We try and put some strategies, coping strategies in place for the family, but what we really want to do is, if possible, is put some guidance on empowering the person with FTD to maintain their independence and help them engage still in meaningful activities. Unfortunately, we know that FTD is a degenerative condition, and over time, more support will be needed. And we're here to help with those transition stages and assist with the maze that's out there, which is the health and social care system. We know it's not easy to navigate around there, and we are there to help for this. And looking at putting in sort of extra support when it's needed. We try to encourage people to have those difficult conversations and can support with those with advanced care planning. And we can help look at introducing additional care slowly into the home, different options, and starting sooner rather than later. And if needed, into care homes as well. We can support families when those transitions need to happen, but we can also help the care homes with their understanding and support for the new residents that are coming in with FTD. So in March this year, our whole worlds were thrown sort of into sort of mayhem with the pandemic of coronavirus. It took us all into a new way of living, and we heard so many times on the TV the unprecedented times we're now living in as the country was put into lockdown. And this was absolutely devastating for everybody. For us at RDS, we had to cancel all our physical meetings straight away and work from home. We saw a huge increase overnight, and basically our workload doubled straight away. We changed our meetings immediately from physical to virtual, and as many of you were with us last time at the annual seminar, we managed to pull that together within a week, which was amazing, and we've been virtual ever since. So we've been doing lots of things to try and help people sort of, you know, while people can't get out, and we've worked on lots of resources. I've worked with Jill on resources, we've worked with Ida, lots of things have been going on, and we've got a fantastic comms officer who's put loads of resources together for us. So it's suggestions with sort of at-home activities to keep people engaged and stimulated, and so there's still some routine in the house. Looking after yourself and your well-being as a carer. The amazing work that Jill's done has been such a bonus for us. Lots of information. As we know, the government information changes daily, and we don't know whether we're coming or going. So we've really tried to keep that up to date for people as a reference point. But other things as well, coping strategies videos, you know, something people can watch to sort of take some guidance from. And also resources for the arts and culture. So you can't get out, you know, you can't go to the theatre. So we put together some resources for dance classes, museum tours, art galleries, music sessions. There's a whole load of information on our website with these resources, which are freely available for everybody. One thing we have concentrated on in the last three months is emergency kits on planning for emergencies if people do have to go into hospital, and if that's the person with dementia or if it's the carer, to make sure that care is in place. And we've really tried to open up those conversations to get people to think about what happens if. And we know that this current climate has been especially difficult for people with FTD and people that are caring for them. A lot of times people thrive on socialisation and those routines they've got into life. Activities really came to a halt when the restrictions came in, and this really had an effect on people. Simple things like going out for a coffee, for a cake, which just took away those simple pleasures in life for everybody, and it was devastating. We've had so many people contacting us that had real sort of worries about sort of the deterioration in their loved ones functioning over this time, and this was really quite distressing sort of for carers. I know many of you, which I've spoke to, we've sort of come to sort of our groups before, we've talked about sort of living by this mantra of don't count the days, make the days count. And lockdown has really prohibited this for people, and it's those lost days that people have really sort of had the fear that they're never going to get back again. And they're really, there's been a lot of worry and concerns about people coming out of lockdown with a different person that they've actually gone into it. And actually with society being different, with social distancing, with wearing masks, how are people going to cope and sort of participate in society? It's been a real big sort of worry for people out there. On the positive side, I've had some lovely sort of conversations with people about how they've been coping really well, how they've really looked at their lives and changed their lives. Some people who've had really hectic sort of schedules, diaries always full, different activity groups to go to, and they've sort of taken a step back and thought, actually, I quite like this sort of slower pace of life. They've enjoyed being together as couples. They've discovered new skills and new hobbies that they can enjoy together. And for this, it's been a sort of time of sort of reassessing life and actually enjoying it. So not everything has been negative for everybody, which has been really nice to report. As John said earlier, we have seen a real increase in our buddying network, and I'm delighted to be able to report that we have, in the last few months, managed to buddy together 100 people. So that can be in small groups or one-to-one. We've budded carers, we've budded people that have got a diagnosis, and I've actually been really astounded with sort of the technical abilities out there. Little Zoom groups going on, WhatsApp groups, and global connections, people from Kent speaking to people in Melbourne. It's amazing to hear these things, and the feedback has been really wonderful. People saying to me, oh, symptoms aren't exactly the same, but we are all in the FTD boat together. And people with a diagnosis saying to me, at last I found somebody who I can actually share my thoughts with, and they'll completely understand. So if you do want to join our buddying network, please let me know. Just send me an email and we can put you on the list, and we'll try and match you up with somebody appropriately. And I'd like to talk about the small groups that we've been facilitating that John mentioned. We really wanted to put extra groups in for people at this time, because it's a long time without going with see people, and there's lots of issues that should come up we really wanted people to deal with. So we had a look at what we could do. We did a couple of educational groups. We found there was lots of questions being asked to us at the direct support team that we could put sort of some educational groups together. So we did one on who are the health professionals and how they can help, which was really informative to people, and about care planning as well, advanced care planning. And we've made some really lovely sort of resources for this as well, which is available for our members, which hopefully they'll find useful. And then we held a couple of groups looking at the impact on identity. So the first one was independence and identity. Excuse me one moment. That's what happens when you talk too much. Independence and identity, which was focusing on carers and how the diagnosis of rare dementia has impacted both theirs and their loved ones' ability to stay engaged with the things that are important to them. And whether this is because of the symptoms or whether it's the difficulties with carers knowing when to step in to help or to step back. And also it's looking about people's assumptions of what dementia actually is. Excuse me. It was also looking at the longer impacts on people's identities and their partners, about how it's going to affect them, what experiences it's going to mean for them in the future, and are they still, as a couple, what is their identity now? We also trialled a new group, especially for people with a diagnosis, which I ran with my colleagues, called Empowering Your Identity. For those that took part, this group was so open and honest about how the diagnosis had affected their own identity, how they'd responded to the misconceptions about dementia, how they'd been educating professionals and educating their friends and families, and what strategies that they'd used to increase their own independence in order to not be defined by diagnosis. They really provided so much kindness for each other and empowerment, and so much humour as well. It's been an absolute sort of privilege to be part of this group. It's been amazing. And the final group that we were lucky enough to be able to facilitate, and we were so pleased that Jill and Seb facilitated this group together, was about grief and loss. And the discussions focused on specific themes associated with the experience of pre-bereavement grief and loss for people that are still caring with somebody with a rare dementia. There's lots of presentations in this to take on the discussion, and they looked at sort of the reality of feelings of grief before death, especially in relation to the losses that a dementia diagnosis entails. The impacts and the effects that grief had on those that care for someone with a rare dementia, and some strategies to help people live with the impact of that grief. These discussions really made the group members share their own familiar experiences of grief and loss, and explore and understand new ways as well, be able to deal with this in the context of the diagnosis of dementia. I think what's really important with this is to say that it did prove quite painful and difficult in parts for some of the group members, and the group, they were always reminded that, take what you can from the group and leave what you don't want, what's not going to be useful. And it's not obligatory to stay with the group if you've found it too difficult. But I think on the group was amazing. It really the feedback was really good and really sort of helped people to come together. And we got lots of buddying out of that as well. We also found that sort of sometimes, it wasn't ready for them. There's no set time when it's the best time to embrace these issues, and there's no one way to grieve. So, there's lots of options open there we could help with as well. So those are the groups that we've run so far, and we start off on next groups in July next week. We've had amazing feedback from this, people saying they were wonderful, inclusive, open and honest, a real opportunity to sort of share their stories, share their worries, ask questions and meet others. So we opened for the next sort of lot of sessions, and within 48 hours we had over 100 people applying for these groups. So we've allocated them now, but next time we will be sort of looking at how we can up the capacity of these groups, because they are really sort of proving great for people. It's a real opportunity for us to meet sort of new members as well that we can't actually meet physically. And obviously with these sort of virtual support groups we're doing at the moment, you can see me, but I can't see you. So it's really good to sort of build relationships that way. So if you do have any ideas on sort of group themes that you would like to see, please get in contact with us. Just before I finish, I do want to remind everybody that if they are finding things difficult at the moment, it is a very, very difficult time, as Jill sort of said. And although we've come out of lockdown, society isn't what it was before. It's going to take a long time to get back to normal. So if you are needing extra help, please do ask for it. Please ask locally. Your social services have been given extra money for this COVID pandemic to do emergency carers assessments and to provide support. Care agencies, they've changed their practice to make sure that they have the ability to be able to come into your homes safely. These services have not stopped at all. We're in constant conversations with social workers and with care agency managers just to make sure we are up to date with that. And really, at the end of the day, if you have any worries, they do have a duty of care make sure that you are supported and kept safe at that time. If you would like any extra advice on how to go through that process, or any questions or any support that we can give you as the direct support team, please do get in contact with us and we can arrange a time to have a proper sort of conversation over the phone or via email with you, because that's what we are here for. We are here to support you. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. And like I said, I really can't wait until we can open up our support groups physically again and I can see all your lovely faces again. And I think John is coming back on screen any point now.
Hello. Yes. Thank you very much, Nikki. Another virtual round of applause. It's always very hard talking to a group virtually, but I think it is not an exaggeration to say that I think the work of Nikki and her group is transformational for what we're doing, and it's, you know, this is really the start of the kind of things we would like to provide, and I think we one has to take out of these times what we can, and I think, you know, particularly the work that Nikki and her group have done over this time is amazing, and hopefully some things that we can carry on taking forward in terms of the kind of support that we can offer to people. So thank you to Nikki. So almost on time, we'll move on to questions and answers. If you haven't already sent your question, the way of doing that is in the question box that you can see on the right hand side. So you've already had a little chat message asking you for things, but please do send them through, and then Nikki's team in the background will be looking through them all and making sure to poke us all that we will definitely make our way through all of the questions. I don't know, Jill, if you're still around and able to come on video, because I think there are quite a number of things that probably I'll pass around. I'll go through the questions and maybe suggest which of us is better to answer it, and then we can all have a go at answering it. So you can also send questions through to Olivia. Her email is olivia.wood@ucl.ac.uk. So if you can't manage to send a question in the question box, then please do email Olivia. And also, as hopefully most of you know, we're always very willing to answer questions. You can always send them through to our team. So I'm going to make my box slightly bigger, otherwise I can only see one thing at a time. So I'll start with one of the questions, which says, what benefits can be expected from speech therapy for those with the primary progressive aphasia variant? So for those of you that know, FTD really obviously has a behavioral variant and a language variant, and often we call that language variant primary progressive aphasia, but lots of names attached to it, and there are obviously specific variants with different names. And you know, the naming is often confusing to us, but we think about the non-fluent variant, the semantic variant, and the logopenic variant, sometimes called progressive non-fluent aphasia, semantic dementia, and logopenic aphasia. I think we'd be very willing to send round. It's a paper written by Anna Volkmer, who Anna is a speech therapist who has joined our team, and it often has been part of the and I think spoke at the last PPA support group meeting. And I think the simple thing to say to that is that it is very much individual. And Anna has written very much about this, that speech therapy has moved very much to a personalized approach and an individual approach. traditionally, speech therapy has thought a lot about communication strategies, not just for the person with PPA, but for the family as well, and how you deal with somebody who is losing their speech and how you deal with that. It is one of the things that we try to provide through the Rare Dementia support is advice to speech therapists who aren't familiar with PPA. And I think sometimes the traditional, lots of traditional speech therapy work is done through around stroke, and that isn't always appropriate for PPA. But I think one would hope for something different for every person, but there is some evidence to show that one can undoubtedly improve communication within families, and that is that can change through the disease, and certainly there's some evidence around improving finding words, but I think it would be very much individual. And I know Anna is always very willing to talk to people about that. And during this time, Anna has taken to virtual things more than most of us because she's been doing lots of video sessions with people. So I think it's something that we do suggest to most people with PPA is to find a speech therapist that has an interest in it, or if not, very welcome for that speech therapist to link with Anna and talk about what possible strategies we might use. So let's move on to another. Oh, Jill, yes.
Add to that, John, is that okay?
Of course. Yeah.
To add, yeah, to endorse everything that you said, of course, but just to pull out the difference, I think you're right. Specialist speech and language therapy is really important for people with PPA. And I remember, I think it was working with Anna several years ago, where she did some video work with people who had PPA as she was trying to build up her program and her sort of strategies for advice. And I may have got some of the details wrong, but I recall this event whereby conversation partners filmed their conversations between each other. And the general advice of a speech and language therapist, for example, was you don't jump in and complete somebody's sentence for them. So taking the very good advice from a speech and language therapist, this conversation partner were filmed. And I think it was something to the tune of, you know, sort of for 3.5 minutes, the conversation halted whilst the person with PPA tried to find the right word, which in normal conversation, we don't really let anybody struggle for more than 2 seconds, do we, before we're naturally stepping in to help. So just to make the point that whilst trying to follow the guidelines that had been given, actually specific to PPA, those guidelines were not perhaps the most helpful. So I think you're right. Specific PPA directed speech and language therapy is crucial.
Great. Yes. No. Absolutely. So I'm jumping around because I want to do these in a sort of specific order. But are people with FTD more likely to become unwell from COVID-19, and what precautions should we take? So I think that's a difficult question. There is nothing inherent in having FTD that we know that makes you more likely to get COVID-19. Now that is slightly different. There has been some research in Alzheimer's disease, and particularly around a marker called ApoE, which is relevant to Alzheimer's disease. That is not the same for FTD. So I have seen that discussed in other places. We have no evidence biologically that people with FTD are more at risk inherently of getting COVID-19. Now, that differs in a sense when we think about vulnerability of people, and when we think about vulnerability as people go through the disease process. Now, having dementia and particularly in the later stages of dementia undoubtedly makes you more vulnerable. And I think we, although not necessarily on the government's list of people that's vulnerable. We have definitely been talking to people about what they might do when they're in the later stages of dementia, and I think that is, we don't completely know the answer to that, but I think, you know, thinking about oneself and being sensible about things in the late stages of dementia, probably people are a little bit more vulnerable to COVID-19. Now, the one issue, of course, that people with early FTD have, and particularly the behavioural variant, is around the nature of loss of change in social interaction and the ability to socially distance. And, you know, we've heard from lots of people that understanding why one should socially distance can be difficult, and that is inherent to one of the key behavioural symptoms of FTD. So I think that is difficult, and I think well, I'll ask Jill and Nikki if they have any good suggestions for those kind of things. But I think it's a complex answer. I think early FTD, no particular reason to be more vulnerable. Late dementia, similar to any form of dementia or any disease in which one is less mobile and therefore probably more vulnerable. And then the added feature is really when you're out and about is around social distancing. Nikki, Jill, other things to add?
I think, yeah, it is. It's the social distancing that we've had lots of questions in about, and how do we do that safely, and the misunderstanding of that. So it is really taking care of your loved one to make sure that they are sort of not going up hugging people in the park. It's very tempting to do that, I know, but sort of trying to keep them safe, trying to make sure that, you know, they wash their hands regularly, that, you know, if you are going out, that they are keeping their masks on. I think this is one of the difficulties that we are hearing when I talked earlier about going back into society. It's for a lot of people, you know, you can't wait to get back out there and do your normal routine, but then you have to realize, when I go to the supermarket, it's not quite the same as it was before. When I can't just normally get on a bus before. So it's taking those extra precautions and having extra people, having an extra pair of hands with you to help with that, to do some distraction. I think if you're going out sort of shopping, you were just going with your partner who has FTD on your own, it's very tempting when you meet somebody else. If you can actually sort of get you know, a few of you together with some sort of rules in place to make people know, that will help with the situation.
Jill, do you have anything to add?
No, thanks, Nikki. I guess to say, perhaps, you know, a reminder to break things down into bite-sized, manageable sort of instructions isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. So rather than long, convoluted explanations as to why we're doing what we're doing, perhaps to have bite-sized, digestible explanations, and also I guess, like always, to kind of lead by example rather than by long-winded explanation. So, you know, I'm wearing my mask, let's put yours on, is perhaps helpful. And I think also being ready to speak very quickly to other members of the public if you sense that somebody perhaps with FTD who is struggling to follow the social norms for understandable reasons, but don't be shy and don't be slow to let people around you know that you know, the person you're with has a medical condition that makes this difficult. I think now more than ever, people do have an understanding of each other's vulnerabilities in a way that perhaps pre-lockdown they didn't. And the other thing actually that I've been working with a local family on was this gentleman who just simply wouldn't accept the staying at home sort of rule, and our local police force actually were incredibly supportive and helpful in terms of taking his details, taking his sort of next of kin address, and just being slightly more sensitive to dealing with him when they were called. So perhaps being proactive.
Yeah. So someone has just, we'll keep on a few COVID-related questions. Dementia doesn't appear to be explicitly on the COVID shielding list. That's correct. But assume we should continue to socially isolate and shield. And well, hopefully some of the things I said before will help with that. I think certainly what we've done with people who come and see us at the National Hospital is actually we've individually been through the list and thought about who is potentially vulnerable and who is not, and spoken to them. So that I know at least at the National Hospital we have an individualised shielding list of people. And I think if you are concerned about it, I think I'm going to say this because there won't be too many people, but you know, we would be happy if you wanted to talk about your individual situation to send a message through to Nikki and her team, and we can always advise based on your individual position. I think it is complex given the government's COVID shielding guidelines, which didn't expressly include people with dementia. But I think hopefully based on what I've said, you can think about whether you should or not. But if you're worried about it, we're definitely happy to answer that on an individual basis. So please do send, if you're concerned about it, do send through to Nikki. So on a similar note, one of the questions is, my husband has a compulsion around travel, constantly asking, can we fly to Italy? Love to travel, doesn't understand why we can't during COVID restrictions. Are there any suggestions for managing this? So this is a little bit along, Jill, what you were just talking about. Perhaps, Jill, I start with you. Thoughts about that?
Really hard, really hard. And I'm aware that whatever we say won't really speak into the actual sort of difficulties of living with that situation. I guess we come back to distraction, to diversion, to perhaps using the theme of flying to introduce conversations about places we've flown to use the theme of aeroplanes to direct ourselves to, I don't know, books or videos or films about flying, to divert and distract, and to keep the explanations why it's not possible bite-sized, manageable, and to perhaps avoid getting more and more complex in our explanations and trying harder to prove and rationalize, you know, to keep things straightforward and consistently the same in terms of our explanations. But I think more than ever, yeah, to take on board distraction and diversion and try and use the theme. This gentleman actually locally it was cars for him. And so his wife ended up sort of saying, let's, you know, see how many red cars come by, see how many blue cars. So kind of using the issue that was the obsession, but to try and divert a different behaviour through it. But I know that that's easy to say and much, much harder to put into place.
Nikki, anything to add?
Yeah, it is really difficult. Distraction. We did have this with one of my members of the group a little while ago, and it was very sort of similar. Of, you know, they want to go out, they want to do things. So instead of going to Italy, Italy comes to you. You look at the virtual resources we've got. We've got great tours of the Uffizi Art Gallery in Florence. Have that. Order in a pizza, get some nice classical music in the background, have a nice gelato in the afternoon, and sort of have that conversation. And if you can have some family round as well in the garden, you know, have those and just talk about some great holidays that you've had. It might not work, we are very much aware of that, but just sort of being able to talk about Italy and sort of some of the things that might stimulate some good memories would be sort of useful. But unfortunately, I'd love to go to Italy as well as the moment, but we can't.
Okay, a couple more COVID things coming in. So I wanted to go next to this one. How else can I support my mum who has FTD when I'm not able to visit her due to a large distance? We live at opposite ends of the countries and socially distance rules. So I think that's difficult to answer. Partly depends on exactly how your mum is, and I think that might be something we can take offline if you wanted to talk to Nikki about and think about the individual circumstances. I mean, I think at the moment it's obviously difficult for everyone with family, and that's made much harder by having FTD. But of course, you know, trying to do video chats and trying to do, you know, trying to make some of the video things as normal social interactions as possible. We've had to try and normalize social interaction over video. And you know, I think lots of people have done that, including, you know, having dinners together over video and having social events over video that feel as normal as you possibly can. So I think it's not easy to have a normal life over video, but sometimes it's better than not doing it and keeping that social interaction going as much as possible. Other thoughts, Nikki?
Relying on neighbours and friends as well locally. I mean, there's lots of community groups that are sort of local to people to make sure that people are well. And you know, if your mum can't do any sort of Zoom or WhatsApp or FaceTime or anything, if you can get somebody that can go around and maybe sort of go to the garden with them or from a distance be able to do that. Again, it's really, really difficult because we don't know what the situation is. So who sent that question in, please get back to us so we can actually sort of, you know, tailor make sort of some sort of support plan for you to take that forward. You know, there will be ways around it and we will be able to help, and we appreciate that it is so different sort of caring from a distance at this time.
Yeah.
Can I just
say yes, no, go on, Jill.
Just at this time of kind of, you know, social media platforms all over the place, just a reminder that the post is still in operation, and actually receiving a letter or receiving photographs through the post or a letter through the post may be more helpful than trying to kind of log on to a Zoom call for some people. So don't forget the post.
A letter, not a bill.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So similar note, we're in the process of moving my sister with PPA into a care home. New residents must isolate in their rooms for 7 to 14 days. What strategies could the staff use to help transition? So I'll start off and say, you know, I think as with all times when people move into care homes, you know, most care homes are very receptive to receiving information about rare illnesses and to really get them, and particularly the manager, to understand what PPA is and what the specific issues would be. And I think, you know, we have resources both on rare dementia support and also on FTD Talk, which has lots of things, and particularly some of the help sheets we have on there, which I think can be helpful. So I think some education for the staff about what to expect on that. I'm assuming they're going to still allow video calls and things. So again, as we talked about, trying to keep in contact through that. These transition points are always difficult, I think. Nikki?
We've actually spoke to lots of care home managers recently as well because of this, and we've got one of the things which has been really lovely is we've had so many care home managers and workers in care homes become part of our health professionals membership. They want to learn, they want to be able to provide, you know, a great service. They want that to be the home for you know, your loved ones go in. One of the things I always advise is open conversation with these. They need to learn from you, and they don't need to learn just about PPA. They need to learn about that person, their likes and dislikes, and you know, having that thorough care plan and support plan, and knowing that person and what could be really beneficial for that person and what could really trigger off sort of some issues. But we are more than happy for whoever sent in that question to get in contact with us, and we can do some liaison work with the care home.
Great. Another question that's relevant to the moment. This is a tough one. What are the best exercises routines to do at the moment, given it's difficult to go out for walks? I'm not sure there's any answer to that. I mean, I must say, when I see all people, I I talk about the three things that I sort of see with it, and I say this to people with FTD or with other forms of dementia or just with cognitive impairments in general, which is about physical health, mental health, and cognitive health. And I think physical health is wide, and that includes exercise and diet and daily life. And those things are important. I don't think that there's no right way or wrong way of doing those things. And so exercises in the house or exercises, you know, trying to keep exercise, even if it's just a short walk around the block, those things are important. And it's the same way when I talk about, people ask about sort of cognitive health, so should I be doing brain training or other things? Again, there's no right or wrong way of doing those things, keeping people's mind active and with things that they like to do and will keep on doing. And just within that, mental health, I think, is really, really important and really feeds into both of those things, and making sure that we spot added depression and anxiety on top of FTD. I think that, you know, depression and anxiety are potentially treatable and things that will help with, and of course are hugely more prevalent during times when people are more socially isolated. So I think no easy answer, but it's finding something with all of these things. It's always finding something that person would wants to do, because that means they will maintain doing it.
And some of the online exercise routines are they're quite well, I was going to say addictive in a way, but they're very motivational, and they speak to you as you're doing the exercise, and some of them are sort of just 8 minutes long, and the same kind of person speaks to you each day. It's almost like a little relationship almost that's kind of going on in the front room whilst you're doing a little bit of exercise. So really worth searching on the internet and just seeing, within reason, of course, what's out there.
Yeah.
I think as well, adding to that, Jill, it is, like you said, John, it's complete personal taste, whether it's like a quick walk sort of in your local neighborhood to smelling the flowers and looking for wildlife, or if you've got that obsessive nature, and the online sort of programs are fantastic. You know, we are seeing the Green Goddess back out there, Mr. Motivator back out there. These, as well as sort of being stimulating, they're really very nostalgic for people. But also, if people do have a really obsessive nature, setting up some sort of circuits in the garden and making it almost quite competitive is really beneficial for some people.
Great. And then I think the last question on COVID related, which is probably for me, which is dementia going to be on the priority vaccine list? I wish I knew the answer to that. Hopefully we will get vaccine. There are lots of very promising vaccine trials going on, including down at UCLH. And I think we just don't know. We don't know the answer to who will be given the vaccine and who won't. But I think, of course, it's likely to be people who are vulnerable, and I think vulnerable. It will be in part defined by the local. I'm not sure, it was done in a very rushed way, and probably best not to go into government reasons for why it was all done, because none of us know the answer to that. But I suspect it would be done differently when we think about vaccines. But I think hard to know the answer to that. So let's move on to some more questions that we might have got at other times. Question is, my mum has become gullible. She gets post, which is scams, telling her she's won a lot of money, and we can't stop her. Maybe I'll read it. No amount of pleading with her or reasoning, showing her articles about these scams convinced her. She gets very hostile, accuses me of not wanting her to win anything. And I think I think within that, of course, it's that the expectation is that you send some initial money back to them, and then you get a lot of money back. So I think in terms of the losing money, aspect of it. I think that's, I'll let Nikki and Jill talk about that, because that's an issue that we have had over a long period of time, and lots of people have that. If it comes to the point that one is losing money, there are a couple of different options for that around trying to limit money. So in a sense, almost giving people pocket money or a card from a new account that has limited spend on it. Banks are very good at that kind of thing in terms of limiting people's spend. And unfortunately, you know, I'm sure many of you have had that experience. And unfortunately, it's, you know, the gullibility is really part of that behavioral symptoms, and it's about trying to limit things. Now, what we always say to people is there is some sense of thinking about what is safe and what is just, you know, what is annoying but safe. And I think there is, you know, some behaviors that people do, or some things that people do, whilst they might seem, you know, irritating behaviors, if they're safe and they're not difficult for the person or for you, sometimes it's about accepting those behaviors. If it's around losing money, then that's different, and then that's thinking about how you do some of those limitations. Maybe Jill first.
Obviously, yeah, everything that you've said, I endorse. And I guess to add to that would be perhaps to approach the post office and put a block on junk mail. You can do that. There's a form I think you can download from the internet. Nikki probably might be able to add more to that on that, I don't know. But I believe there's a form that you can download quite easily, and the post office will restrict the amount of mail that comes. And also with the telephone, you can do, again, a similar block that means only callers who are known or who are not scam, you know, obvious scam callers get through. So practically speaking, those were two other suggestions that came to mind whilst you were speaking, John. I don't know if Nikki has any other gems of wisdom.
If you can, so yeah, sorry, I was muted. My son was in the background making lots of noise. Yeah, if you could get in contact with us and we can help you with the postal registration, because there is the preferential system that we can help talk you through. I don't have it on the top of my head, but I can help with that. And yeah, it's internet and sort of phone call scams, trying to limit that as much as possible. You can, you know, there are things you can put in place for this. And most importantly as well, making sure that if you haven't started the lasting power of attorney, to please get that ball rolling, because this will need to come into play at some point. But we do find that sort of having a new account and having one card with a limit on it, and people like to have that limit. You don't want to take all independence away from somebody. You want to have, we all need our little pleasures in life, but it's just sort of making sure that there's some sort of safety within that.
So can we comment on loss of inhibitions in inappropriate sexual behavior in people with FTD? I mean, to say that it exists and people can really have either a lowered sexual drive or an increased sexual drive, and it's similar to other behaviors. Some of it is, of course, is related to that loss of inhibition. Now, it's very difficult, and I think Nikki, I was just, as I was looking through this, I do remember, and I can't quite remember when we did have someone talk about sexuality and FTD not that long ago. Was that a year or two ago?
I think yes, it was about 2 years ago, so it may be sort of point that we could actually have another session on that coming up. But
I did think, and it may be difficult, but something that may be amenable to a smaller group, and having an expert in, you know, we do work with people who think about sexuality and FTD, and I think something that if people were interested in, it's an extremely difficult topic. I think, you know, again, as we talk about with certain behaviors, it's around distraction that can be hard. But it is about thinking about other ways of distracting people when people are persistent, if that's the issue. But it can be very difficult, and I think well, I'll ask maybe Nikki first. Other thoughts?
I think this is it is an issue that comes up a lot. It is an issue which some people want to talk about and other people really don't want to talk about. I think it may work better in some small groups. So if people have an interest in this, please come forward to us and we can maybe sort of arrange a small group on this. I know a fantastic facilitator who deals with this extremely well. I have seen it at various large groups, and actually having 50 people in a circle sitting around talking about sex sometimes doesn't quite work as well. So I think if there is interest out there, because everybody's situation is going to be slightly different, it will be worth having a small discussion group on this.
Great. Jill, anything else to add?
No, I think that sounds a great idea, Nikki. And I just recall in the distant memory of my head that the AFTD, the American FTD group, I think had some papers or some advice sheets on sexuality in FTD. So it might be worth us doing a bit of a search on what literature is out there, and I'm happy to help with that if that's helpful.
Great.
Put together some kind of fact sheet.
Yeah, I'm going to move on because actually we're really there are loads of questions. So I'm going to move on quickly to some questions about care. So I'll go down and find this again. I've been trying to do them in a particular order, but what questions should I be asking care agencies in terms of finding a care home? Jill, Nikki.
So it's care agencies for finding a care home.
What kind of questions should I be asking care agencies?
Care agencies.
Oh, sorry. The questions I found is, I'm caring for someone with FTD. I'm looking to have paid carers come in for more support. What questions should I be asking care agencies?
Really sort of having care coming in, you want them to be safe, you want them to have some understanding of the condition, but also you want them to be willing to learn about the person. And it's really the person-centered care of how they're going to react with your mother, your father, your husband, your wife, your loved one. Basically, it's that interaction of, you know, what are they going to bring to the table? What do you want them to come in for? What do you want them to help with? And how do you want them to react with your loved one? And actually, it's asking them the questions, but giving them as much information as possible of, you know, the person they're coming to look after, so they know them. It's like introducing a family member or a really good friend. It's getting to know them so they can provide the best support and care for them. I mean, obviously at this time, if you're getting somebody in from the care agencies will have, you know, gone to extreme lengths to make sure that they're safe and they're qualified and they can do their job thoroughly. So it's finding out sort of all of that information.
And just sort of on a similar note, someone said, my wife has FTD. How do I persuade her that she needs some help in the house as she is in denial? Now, that is very difficult, and that is something that we have obviously, you know, lots of people have asked us over many years. It can be very, very difficult. Jill, do you want to start? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just first of all, to just pick up on the word denial, if that's okay. And whilst I understand the appropriateness of that word, I think it's also important to recognise that with FTD, we're not just purely talking about denial. We're actually talking about lack of insight, lack of awareness of. So they're slightly different in terms of their resolution, I think. You can bring someone to a point at which they accept they're in denial, but actually convincing somebody of something they haven't got an awareness or insight into is a slightly different ball game, and perhaps changes the way you approach this situation. And I think perhaps you begin by changing slightly the reasons why somebody's coming in to help. So maybe they're coming to help me, not you. Maybe I would benefit by person X coming in and helping with job X, Y, and Z. So to perhaps just switch the emphasis on which care, if you want to call it care, is coming into the home, but call it something different and build it around a different set of guises, really, off the top of my head. I don't know, Nikki, again, if you've got anything else.
I think it's how you introduce them as well. It's introduce it slowly and build that relationship. Please do not sort of bring somebody in from day one and expect them to do personal care. If somebody came into my home and wanted to give me a bath straight away, I think it would scare the living daylights out of me. So it is making sure you've got somebody in, what the reason is, how you go about that, how you introduce it, and taking things slowly to build up that relationship.
And I think, Nikki, just in thinking about some people we've worked together with FTD, the sort of concept of being a personal assistant rather than a carer works very well with a number of people.
Yes, something, and especially if somebody with FTD has some sort of obsession or some real delight in their life that they really like, if they collect records or something, bring somebody in to enjoy that hobby with them.
And I think sometimes situations which seem, impossible, once the right person comes into the situation, it's amazing how much easier it is than anybody ever anticipated. You try.
Yes. So just a question, which is, I think, is to me about someone who's father is in a care home, become agitated during the lockdown, and the care home has talked to the GP about starting some medication to calm him down, and it sounds like it's a drug within what we call the benzodiazepine group of drugs, so within the sort of diazepam type group. I think I would say that the majority of GPs are very sensible. There are no risk-free ways, drug-free ways of doing that. And care homes and doctors in general are experienced at thinking about how you decrease agitation in a drug-free way. But unfortunately, on a sort of risk-benefit ratio, one sometimes thinks about what drugs can be used. One should always, and I always say to people, all drugs are trials. All drugs are, if they don't work, they don't work. If they have side effects, you stop them. They're always a trial. They're not there to be given and then given forever. They're always a trial to think about what best way of doing them. Every drug you read will always have side effects, and we know that. But it is a bit about the risk and the benefits. And if the benefit is increased safety to that person when they're agitated, then sometimes the move from no drug to drug is sometimes pushed in the drug favor. And I think, there are different ways of doing that, but using drugs within the benzodiazepine group it is sometimes a way that GPs will do that. And I think one just has to be clear that that's not something that if there are issues or side effects with it, it's about making sure that you can be the advocate for that person, saying this isn't something we necessarily want to carry on. But but sometimes, unfortunately, drugs are needed to try and help, as much as people try to avoid them as much as possible. I'll run through a couple of the last things. I think I've gone through most of the care-related things. So I'll move on. There's a question around, I'm concerned my daughter being diagnosed, would like to start a family using IVF intervention program, which has been put on hold, causing her some anxiety. So I'm assuming that your daughter has a genetic mutation, but isn't symptomatic, as in they have a pre-symptomatic genetic mutation. And as people will sometimes have heard me talk about before, there is a process called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, where people who do know that they have a genetic mutation can have children through an IVF type way that don't carry that mutation. I think I don't know when it's going to start again. I'm sure those things, I know that our services are starting to get back up and running. The expectation is, at least at the National Hospital, that most of our services will have at least some parts of it by August or September. I can see why it is hugely anxiety. IVF is anxiety inducing, full stop, but IVF, when you're doing it as part of PGD, is even more anxiety inducing. What I would say is what we do through the familial FTD support group is we have a group of people who've gone through the process of PGD who are very happy to talk to other people. So it's a sort of very super specialist buddying up. There are people who are very happy who've had children through PGD that no longer carry an FTD mutation, who are very happy to talk to people about the process they've been through. So we're always happy to hear from people if that would be helpful to do. And then lastly, I think there are a couple of questions about research. And one of the questions is about the research we're doing in the rare dementia support. And yes, there is a whole research program called the Impact Study, which is around how rare dementia support works. We're doing a couple of very FTD specific projects. Thank you to all of you that spoke to one of our clinical psychology doctorate students who's been doing a project around caring. She actually has a paper coming out on that work, which I think we're very happy to share with people. It was an analysis of talking to about 10 or 15 carers about the things they wanted to get out of this group and other things. We're also looking to start, and this is through one of our psychologists, Josh Stott, a program about talking to children about FTD. And he will be, one of his students will be looking to talk to people about that. So we can tell you about that. And I don't know whether Jill or Nikki, you've got anything to add about other things happening?
The Impact Project, if anybody wants to be involved with that, with the interviews, please get in contact with our direct support team, and Olivia or Claire can arrange to email you with more information and arrange a time for an interview with that. Yeah.
Great. And I think a very quick question, do people with behavioural variants also lose their speech? Lots of people will do. So I think it's same with all forms of dementia and degenerative disease. Lots of people over time will lose their speech and will become no longer be able to speak later on in the illness. But for most people with behavioural variant FTD, that'll be something that happens in the sort of middle to late stages of the illness. And then I think there is, I think I've managed to get through everything. Are the results coming out in dementia trials that are positive to finding a disease-modifying therapy? The answer to that is there are some very positive results coming out in some of the genetic forms. So very positive early study in people with progranulin mutations, which we are running at the National Hospital, and lots of work on trials. Are likely to be trials starting for people with the other forms of genetic FTD within the next 12 months. Less studies so far on people that have the non-genetic forms, but I think we're probably a couple of years away from doing trials in people with the non-genetic forms. And then lastly, there's a question about, I read in the summer issue of Alzheimer Research UK, UCL carrying out a study looking into FTD. When will this begin? Already going. So we have two big studies. If you have a genetic form, it's called GenFI. If it's a non-genetic form, the study is called LIFT, or the Longitudinal Investigation of FTD. That is, if you want the contact details, I'm sure our support team will give you that, but it essentially through our research coordinator, Annabelle Nelson, who can tell you more about that. Can you tell us more about the study? What are the biological signs we're looking for? We're doing lots of things. Hopefully, one of the things that will happen is the Dementia Research Centre website is just being updated. We have a new communications officer who works between the Dementia Research Centre and the RDS, who's helping us update. And I think hopefully we'll be able to have a bit more online about what all the studies are doing and showing. And we're looking at lots of different things. So I think I've managed to get through all 20 questions that were on the list. So I will say goodbye now. I'll let Jill and Nikki also comment. These things are, we hope, helpful during a very difficult time. We do hope we'll be back doing face-to-face meetings at some point. hopefully later in the year, if not early next year, and we'll have to see how things go. But at the moment, we'll be carrying on these virtual meetings, and particularly we'd like to hear about your thoughts about small group meetings. And already sounds like we've had a couple of suggestions here already about things we could do. So thank you very much for listening in. Please let us know. There are a couple of individual people that there are clearly things that we can help with. And so please do contact Nikki and her team, and we'll try and provide some more individualized help with some of those questions. But thank you very much for everyone attending. Jill, and then I'll let Nikki finish.
I just want to say thank you for the invitation to join you this morning, and as ever, it's a real privilege to be amongst you. And I, as ever, take what is helpful from this meeting and leave anything that isn't, or ask for clarification if there's anything that needs clarifying. But know over and above that you're not alone in this situation, and there is help available. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, John. Thank you for the amazing virtual support group that we're managing to provide for everybody. Thank you for everybody listening. And like we said, we really do hope to get the physical groups back going, but we still want to do virtual groups because we do realise how important this is for people that can't actually attend our physical centres. So I think going forward, we will be incorporating these. And of course, the small groups, they are turning out to be really successful. So any more thoughts coming in, how we can evolve this going forward. So thank you to everybody. But before I go, I want to do a huge thank you to Emily and Claire and Olivia, who are behind the scenes today, making sure this could work, because I think if it was left up to us, it probably really wouldn't. But so thank you to everybody. Stay safe, keep well, and any questions, please get in contact with us.
Yeah.